To say that the video game industry has come a long way would be the understatement of the century. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to Mojo Plays and click on the links in the description to vote on upcoming content. Beyond the graphical enhancements, we are in an age where video games have become award-winning forms of entertainment. Encompassing pieces from almost every other form of media, video games provide powerful storytelling elements, remarkable characters, fantastic music, and of course, gameplay that takes you to another world. And that's just the games themselves. The industry as a whole has evolved exponentially throughout the years. Indie developers, YouTubers, and virtual reality are capturing the hearts and minds of entire generations. The future and its possibilities are endless. And in our opinion, we owe it all to the little 8-bit console that could, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Will you be the one to witness the birth of the incredible Nintendo Entertainment System?
Believe it or not, there was a time when the gaming industry was suffering badly. Imagine an E3 sales presentation that reveals low sales for a console. The company will either continue to attempt to support it or let it die and launch something better, and maybe even keep some elements of the failed console. Now, imagine that scenario, but with every game company at the same time. In the early 80s, consoles were released one after another in quick succession in an attempt to resuscitate the industry. But all it did was create fatigue amongst consumers. There were just way too many options and not enough quality games, and eventually, it just kinda died. That is what the NES was up against when it was released in 1985.
Now you're playing with power.
And somehow, it succeeded and gave a one-up mushroom to the whole video game industry. But let's step away from that narrative for a moment. Breathing new life into a dying market is, of course, admirable. However, that's not the only reason why people love the NES. It was a fresh start not only for consoles, but for developers, as several iconic studios hit the ground running during the NES's heyday. Capcom brought us a super fighting robot and even put a grouchy, wealthy duck on the moon. Konami introduced us to gaming's best vampire hunter, and then later threw us into the depths of the jungle, armed with spread shots and kick-ass music. And let's not forget a certain studio's Final Fantasy game. These developers, and many others, used the NES to reintroduce or just flat out introduce consumers to gaming, fleshing out the genres they'd recently become exhausted with. They did more than just provide entertaining gameplay though. They created iconic characters that would stay with us well beyond the NES's lifespan. Instead of offering you something that you'd put down and forget about after you'd reached the end goal, they created titles with staying power. From remasters to gaming bundles to playing the latest installment in the adventures of Mario, Link, or Samus, these sentiments aren't just exclusive to Nintendo. We're always excited to finally have a new Mega Man adventure. And Netflix, when are we gonna get some more Castlevania? Then there's the consoles that came after the NES, which probably wouldn't have ever arrived without the NES paving the way. After the video game crash, the NES's success was like a beacon. It was okay to invest in video games again. Companies that would become their fiercest competitors stepped up with their own consoles and characters. Sega! This created a market that was no longer oversaturated with lackluster devices and games. That's not to say that everything in that era was perfect, but we certainly had better options than we did back in the early 80s. Because of the NES, people were willing to try their hand at creating something better, and they succeeded time and time again, whether it was through exclusives or games that were available on multiple platforms. Even if games aren't being developed for the NES anymore, people are still playing it. We mentioned that characters in games that were born on the Nintendo Entertainment System have had staying power for decades, but honestly the console has too. People went insane when the NES Classic was announced, as it brought about memories of Saturday morning cartoons, cereal, and having your mind blown when you ducked behind the stage in Super Mario Bros. 3. While there aren't a lot of games that have aged extremely gracefully, and some are just plain inexcusable, there's something about the NES that just gets us excited about gaming all over again. For many, it's the first console they ever played, whether it was in their own home or at another friend's house. You know, the one who had the NES, the light gun, and the running pad. It feels like there's still something to discover with that old console. Maybe we can beat the level faster or finally conquer the last level in Ninja Gaiden. Even with heavy hitters in the gaming industry, there's still something so quaint about the NES that many still find themselves revisiting it over and over, and being overjoyed when other games pay homage to its retro style. The Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't the first gaming console, and you can even argue that it wasn't the first to do gaming well, as many players enjoyed its predecessors before the industry crash.
Don't just watch television tonight, play it.
But to us, it was the first to really show the potential that video games had to offer. Video games were suddenly telling stories and allowing us to go on epic adventures. They were offering incredible soundtracks and challenges that made us strategize our next move. Yes, the NES saved the video game industry, but it did so much more than that. It was a fresh start to an oversaturated market and the rebirth of the medium as a whole. The industry rose out of the ashes, and it was the biggest step towards making it as celebrated as it is now. While the debate on which console is the best is one we'll probably be having for years to come. For our money, it's hard to deny that the greatest of all time is the gray and black brick house that is the Nintendo Entertainment System. Thanks for watching Mojo Plays. Be sure to subscribe and click on the link in the description below to check out our suggestion page and vote on what content you'd like to see us cover next.